Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Reach the Peak, the show where you guys recommend the cars and then I take them up our hill climb course to see which one can come out on top. Today we have 5 cars, as always, recommended by you guys, and we're going to be starting today with a supercar. This is the 2013 Audi R8 V10 Plus. This thing has 542 horsepower, 398 foot-pound of torque, 3,682 pounds of weight. It is an S1 class car, 886 in PI. When equipped with the snow tyres, it is the most powerful vehicle here today, the torquiest vehicle here today, the heaviest vehicle here today, and the highest PI vehicle. It also has 4-wheel drive and a fantastic sounding V10 engine. That's really where my praise for the R8's gonna stop. I'm not a huge fan of the Audi R8, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I do prefer the newer one over this one. This particular model, I just don't like it. I see it really as a cheaper Gallardo. That being said, it wasn't a terrible car to drive up here by any stretch of the imagination. It is a little uninteresting, I will say that. It drives essentially the same as the Lamborghini Gallardo, pretty much down to a T. They're very similar speed-wise, they're very similar on their sort of general overall statistics. They do share engines, and I think they share platforms as well. I'm fairly certain they do. Yeah, very, very similar cars between the two. The R8 may get an advantage of, well, the Gallardo went round in the first episode. This is going around in the 11th episode, so yeah, you know, I've obviously had time to learn the course. In theory, the R8 should be a tiny bit slower than the Gallardo. Yeah, the only real thing I can say about this car, like negative, about the driving experience, other than it being a little bit uninteresting, there is a fair amount of understeer in this vehicle. It will understeer if you do try to push it a little bit too much through corners and so on. Not the greatest car in the world. You will see I hit the ice patch a little bit there. Probably shouldn't have done that, but yeah, it has a few issues sort of bouncing around a bit. We've seen that with some more recent cars, as I'm seeming to take a bit more speed through those corners. The supercars will bounce around and so on, which is a little bit difficult when it comes down to dealing with that. Anyways, next up we have a hot hatch. This is actually one of the better hot hatches in the world right now. This is the 2013 Mercedes-Benz A45 AMG. It has 355 horsepower, 332 foot-pound of torque. Weighs 3,267 pounds. I have added the Mercedes-Benz Aero kit to this. It doesn't provide any advantage in terms of like being adjustable or anything, but it does up the PI by 1 for some reason. It also adds 4 pounds of weight, so you should be aware of that. This is an A-class car, 800 in PI, although it should realistically be 799, but for whatever reason, when you add these bits on the car, increases PI. But again, it's not adjustable downforce. It doesn't add any real benefit to the handling. I don't really know why it increases PI. But anyways, the A45 AMG, of course, one of the better hot hatches in the world right now. This thing really is meant to stand toe-to-toe with the likes of your Ford Focus RS, you know, your sort of ultimate hot hatch. In terms of that, the A45 was pretty decent. Decent enough anyways. I've had issues driving this car around on, say, Forza Top Gear laps, because it has a pretty... It doesn't have a great gearbox. Admittedly, for Reach the Peak it isn't too bad, because there isn't as many sort of low-speed turns as there are on Top Gear, which is better for the car. Ultimately, yeah, very, very decent traction. It does understeer moderately. It isn't fantastic through the corners. The Focus RS is definitely the better handling sort of ultimate hot hatch. To be honest with you, that's the one I'd probably recommend over the A45. But the A45 is certainly a decent car nonetheless, and with a 4-wheel drive system and 355 horsepower, this is pretty well set up to do very well around this course. And indeed, it did drive pretty well. A fairly quick car, this as well. You can see through the corners, you can take a decent amount of speed. Again, it has very, very good traction thanks to its 4-wheel drive. It has no issue putting a power down whatsoever in this thing. Other than understeering a little bit, I haven't really got any major complaints about the A45 AMG or the way it drove. So yeah, a solid vehicle, could do very well indeed. Next up, we have what I'm assuming a lot of people wanted to see for a while. This is, of course, the 1998 Toyota Supra RZ, 320 horsepower, 315 foot-pound of torque, 3,329 pounds of weight. This thing is an A-class car, 777 in PI. Toyota Supra, very, very popular car. thanks to its overuse in popular culture, essentially. I do quite like the Mark IV Supra, if I'm being honest. It's definitely my favourite of the Supras, because the other ones I don't really care for, but I do like this car. Anyways, the actual Supra itself, what is it like? Of course, it is the first rear-wheel drive car of today, and that obviously does pose some issues around here. Rear-wheel drive is probably the least preferred drivetrain out of the free ones that you can find in-game, and as a result, it did struggle a little bit. It does struggle with getting its power down a bit, sort of. It does get bogged down. I'm putting some of the power putting down issues to the very, very large turbo on this thing. Of course, it is a turbocharged sports car, and there is a fair bit of turbo lag when it comes to the Supra, so yeah, I guess that might have affected its putting the power down a little bit. When that turbo starts kicking in, you know, it does spin the rear wheels up a fair bit. It wasn't terrible. There's certainly been worse rear-wheel drive cars to drive up here. It was decent, actually. You know, it was a pretty decent rear-wheel drive car. Certainly not one of the worst, but yeah, just not particularly incredible at the same time. Handling was decent. Again, the only real issue this car did have was just getting bogged down. You can see it up here mostly. You know, that is where most of the rear-wheel drive cars really do struggle. Up these sorts of hill S-bend bit here, they do struggle significantly with trying to find traction, as well as on some of the straights. But once it gets into a straight line, it is a fairly quick car. 320 horsepower isn't an awful lot compared to modern sports cars of today, but this thing is still pretty light, and it's pretty good. Again, I do like the Mark IV Supra. I will admit, you know, straight off the bat, the road is much more the home of this place. It does much prefer being on the road. But if you ever needed to take a untold expedition into the snow, provided you have snow tires at least, it certainly isn't a bad car. To compare the Supra, I actually bought along a pretty underrated, pretty forgotten car here in Forza Horizon 3. This is the 2013 Hyundai Genesis Coupe, 348 horsepower, 295 foot-pound of torque, 3,453 pounds of weight, A-class car, 781 in PI. Pretty similar statistics to the Toyota then. It does weigh a little bit more, but consequently it does have a bit more power, although it is down on torque. Genesis really is a bit of a forgotten car in this game. Honestly, I do forget about it. The Genesis is a bit of a car for me. It exists. I'm not a massive fan of it. I know a few people are. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad car. It's basically an Infinity. You know, V6 engine in the front, rear wheel drive in the back, kind of Grand Tourer, kind of sports car, that sort of thing. Anyways, the Genesis did drive pretty similar to the Supra, actually, just as I was really expecting. Another fairly decent car to drive up here. Between the Supra and this, I would say this doesn't get bogged down as much, just because it hasn't really got a turbo kick in. And, you know, at least I'm 99% sure this car is naturally aspirated, unlike the Supra, which is, of course, turbocharged. And that does provide an advantage to the Hyundai. Yeah, you know, obviously because it hasn't got an influx of boost all of a sudden coming on, there's no turbo lag, and a naturally aspirated engine does deliver its power more, well, naturally. This car does slide a little bit more though. Handling wise, it's not quite as good as the Supra. It does like to slide around a bit more, and it does also get bogged down just like the Supra, although maybe just a little bit less. Choosing between the two, I probably would sort of turn my hands towards the Supra. That was the car I preferred driving up here. That was, in my opinion, the better handling vehicle. But the Genesis certainly isn't bad. It doesn't deserve to be quite as forgotten as it is. It's always been one of those cars that have sort of stuck around in Forza and no one's really sure why. A bit like the Scion TC in the motorsport games, really. You know, it's just sort of there. No one really uses it, which is a little bit of a shame. Because, you know, the Genesis is a pretty flexible platform. And finally today, possibly the most interesting car of today, we have the 2000 Lotus 340R, 177 horsepower, 126 foot-pound of torque, 1,485 pounds of weight. This is an A-class car, 767 in PI. It is the least powerful vehicle here today, the least torquey vehicle here today, the lightest vehicle here today, and the lowest in PI. So yeah, the most powerful car, or sorry, the highest PI car. The first car is the most powerful, best car, and the last car is statistically the worst car. So there you go, pretty simple there. Anyways, the 340R. This is a car I've always been kind of interested in driving ever since I saw it in Forza. It is a weird looking contraption. As far as I understand it, this is basically a modified track version of a Lotus Elise, but with sort of a weird open wheelness. A very, very strange car. Very, very cool car though. I definitely like seeing stuff like this in Forza. Interesting cars. Of course, this is the return to track toys as well. We haven't really had many of these go up. The only one that really comes to mind for me is the BAC Mono. Between this and the Mono, this is surprisingly great. This really was a very, very capable car up here. I was not expecting that. The BAC Mono did pretty awfully. Granted, the Mono did have essentially double the power of this thing. But I was not expecting this car to be nearly as good as it was. It was pretty fantastic. I'm going to put some of that down to the way this thing sort of uses its power. It hasn't got a whole lot of power. You know, it's only got 177 horsepower, and that means in terms of this track, it's pretty phenomenal, because it can stick that power down very, very easily. You know, there's no wheel spinning in this vehicle, there's no struggling to get the power down, there's no bogging down, despite the fact it's mid-engine rear-wheel drive. It will just stick the power down. It's very similar to the Renault 5 Turbo that we had go around a couple of weeks ago in that regard. You know, that car could very much just stick the power down, and it honestly felt four-wheel drive. This didn't feel all-wheel drive, I won't say that for certain, but very, very solid car. If you want a rally car that's a little bit unconventional, the Lotus 340R may have you covered, because honestly, very, very surprising car to me, at least. Anyways, we head on to the leaderboard now, and in first place for today, it's no surprise, is the Audi R8 V10 Plus. Goes in 7th with a 205.092, beats the Lamborghini Gallardo by 0.5 of a second. I'm going to put that down mostly to the fact that I've learnt the track a little bit better over the first episode. Otherwise, I'd expect the Gallardo to be a bit quicker. A45 AMG does fantastically well, in fact, 210.430. It beats a McLaren P1 and a Range Rover Supercharged, which is pretty phenomenal from that little hot hatch. Moving down the board some more, we find the Lotus 340R, again a very, very respectable place, possibly the most surprising car of the day, going into 21st with a 216.363, beats the Impreza 22B. That is pretty incredible. Also beats the BAC Mono by over 2 seconds as well, so very capable car is the 340R, as it turns out. And the final two cars of today, the Toyota Supra goes into 30th with a 220.641, just a little bit off the Mitsubishi Galant, a little bit quicker than the Commodore GTS. Yeah, fairly respectable time for the rear-wheel drive car. Of course, it sort of is in that cluster. Speaking of clusters, the Hyundai Genesis Coupe ends up in 34th with a 221.408. Does beat out the Aston Martin Vulcan by 0.3 of a second. Doncavort GTO, a little bit slower than the Trophy Truck and the Lotus Carlton though, so pretty average for a rear-wheel drive vehicle of this caliber. Anyways, friends, that is going to be it from me. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Reach the Peak. Of course, if you did enjoy and you want to request a car, then feel free to request one down below in the comment section, and I will add it to my list. With that all being said and done, thank you all very much for watching, friends. My name is the Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.